So this demo shows really the power of connected planning and how we can connect plans across different trusts within the NHS and also within different departments within an individual trust. So we've already heard how ambulances can use machine learning and statistical forecasting techniques to predict 999 111 calls and vehicle dispatches. And one output of that, and on the left-hand side of this page, is how many patients they expect to arrive in an ambulance at a given acute unit at a given time of day and date in the future. So then we can use that as an input to actually start planning out some of the capacity in terms of beds within that acute unit and pinpointing days and times where we're going to have an undercapacity problem. So let's go through and have a look at the dashboard that enables us to do that. And we can see on this dashboard, it's nice and easy to use. I can choose the month of the year that I'm looking at by clicking up here. I can choose which acuity I'm looking at by choosing the drop-down list there. Let's have a look at majors. And we can see in this drop-down, I'll come back to this in a minute, but we can plan out different scenarios to help us manage the problems that surface on the dashboard. But we'll have a look at the baseline scenario for the time being. So you would have seen this graph updating. Let me just expand that and explain a little bit around what's happening in this graph. So the first thing this graph is showing is by day of the month we've chosen, how many beds are going to be required on that day. We can then look at the capacity in terms of the number of beds we actually have on each day to meet that. And we can see there are some days like 13th of March where we have undercapacity, and we can have that highlighted like so. And we can also show days where we have overcapacity as well. So that gives us a really interesting picture. We can see we've got a problem on the 13th of March. And you can see I've clicked on the 13th of March, and down below here, it's zooming in on that day. And we can see that it's showing us what the picture looks like each hour of the day. And I can see, for example, that we've got a problem in the early hours of the day ahead of 9 o'clock. And we've got a problem later on in the day in the early evening. So how do we build that picture up? So if I expand this schema, what this shows is the schema that sits behind this whole model. And essentially, this takes the patient's journey through the acute unit to being triaged, to being discharged at that point, to awaiting a decision, and either being admitted or not, or eventually discharged. It's a very simple schema. Just for demonstration purposes, we can clearly make this more complex as individual needs require. So I mentioned earlier that we have the ability to plan out different scenarios. So now we know we've got a problem on the 13th of March. We could plan out what we're going to do about that and how we're going to change some of those assumptions that build up that scenario. So we can see down here, here's a table that shows all of our sort of 5 different scenarios we've got going across the top there, and then all of the assumptions that go into each of those scenarios. So things like how much time does it take to perform the triage? How much time does it take to discharge a patient? So if I want to create a new one, I simply click on Create. I can give it a code, and I can give it a name. So call it Scenario 1. I'd submit that, and that new scenario will appear in the column on the right-hand side here. And we can see at the moment, for all of our different assumption sets, it's using our baseline assumption sets. So let's actually go through and say, well, actually, we're going to have a particular initiative which is going to impact our time to admit patients, which is hopefully going to help the situation. So let's just choose that initiative. That's overwritten our baseline. And then we go to the top of the page. We can see our similar graph. It's now showing that new scenario that we've just modeled out in a few clicks. And then if we toggle back to our baseline and look at the graph, you can see that that's impacted slightly the 13th of March. Hasn't quite fixed the problem, but has helped somewhat. So let's zero in on one of those assumption sets. So you can see them all listed out on the right-hand side. And here's time to admit, which was the one that we've just chosen for our new scenario. And on this page, we can see all the data that sits behind that. So we can see here are our baseline assumptions in terms of the hours it takes to admit someone, depending on their acuity and depending on the hour of day. And we can make these as complex as need be. We can also see on the right-hand side, the new assumption set that we chose with some slightly different assumptions. We've got 3 hours there instead of 2 for others. So that's just a real whistle-stop tour of how we can model out and identify problems with hospital bed capacity. But coming back to the landing page, of course, the journey then goes on after there, because some of the other things that we might want to do will impact shift patterns and how we resource and schedule our staff. And we can connect the plan that we've made for bed capacity with the plans that we can make in Anaplan for more operational things like individual staffing decisions. So hopefully that's been a really good demonstration of the power of connected planning in the context of an acute unit.